Hey y'all, welcome. Today is December 5th, 2024. And I want to start today talking about things I've been pondering. What I wrote down was the thing that I've been pondering most recently is how a lot of people focus on fixing others when they can really use a dose of trying to fix themselves. I see this often when it comes to kids, and this will definitely lend itself easily to transition into today's podcast. I've done a lot of research and a lot of time spent learning about human behaviors. And just in my own personal life, when I've seen children behaving badly, the focus of the parent is to diagnose the child, get them mental, physical, discipline in order to get them back in order. But what I now know is that children are attached to their parents. And anything that you see, any behavior that you see your child displaying is probably a representation of what you have going on internally, what things that you are struggling with at the time, what things that are triggering you right now. And it would behoove you to take a look into yourself and get yourself the discipline, mental health, behavioral health that you need so that your child can learn from you from example and not from what you get on the outside to support them. I think it's a given that everyone knows that children learn way more based on what they see than from what you tell them to do, right? And the challenge is that we oftentimes show up saying like, do as I say, not as I do, right? For our ego, for a lack of self-regulation skills, for our lack of bandwidth, because we're too busy trying to do all the things to succeed and keep up with the Joneses and live the life that we thought we should be living. But ultimately, it is those things that we're trying to do that cause us to lose connection with our children and cause us to try to figure them out when all we really need to do is lean in. Oftentimes we know what our children will do by observing them, but we usually don't know why they do what they do because we haven't built a real meaningful connection with them. So to fill in the gaps, we create assumptions. And oftentimes those assumptions come with labels. They're a bad kid. They're lazy, unmotivated, don't want to apply themselves, don't want to listen to authority. But what if your children are crying out for help? What if what you perceive as bad behavior is the only language that a child has to say what is happening to them, that they know will allow their parents to give them their full undivided attention? I think we need to think about those things more often. In a world where we're so tired, we're so stressed, we're so over capacity, trying to do all the things to make sure our kids have something we never had. We may miss giving our kids something they always could have had access to. So that's the thing I've been pondering for today. And yeah, my eyes are still watering. But yeah, so that's how I wanted to start out the day. And this is a great transition into today's topic. So let's get into that. Okay, so today's topic is all about this documentary I watched called American Tragedy. Specifically, the one I watched was on Tubi, and it was about the Columbine shooting. If you're not familiar with the Columbine shooting, head on over to your Wikipedia page and look up Columbine shooting. It was one of the most deadly mass school shootings up until that time. And it really, really rocked the nation. All these years later, one of the shooter's mother has been just making her round, trying to like make sense of things and also like to educate other parents on what she thinks they need to know in order to prevent this sort of tragedy again. So that's the foundation of what I want to talk about today, this documentary. So I made a lot of observations. So let me turn to my little notebook, okay? And this is just going to be a stream of consciousness conversation just based on my notes that I wrote down. The first thing that popped into my mind as I was watching this documentary is that suicide and murder-suicide is a heavily non-marginalized people's thing, right? I believe there are way more. I did some research a while back, and there are like significantly more people that are of Caucasian persuasion that unalive themselves than other races. in America. Now, marginalized people, they gonna kill other people. They ain't gonna kill ourselves, you know. And what I know for sure is that depression is the gateway to suicide, right? And so, in my mind, the dots that connected was that marginalized people really lived in a state of anxiety, financial anxiety. What is we gonna do, right? We ain't got nothing, what we gonna do? But non-marginalized people live in a state of depression. Like, why did I do that? What's wrong with me? All of these things. Also, repressed anger, which really lends itself really well to what happened with Dylan, which was one of the shooters and the focus of this documentary. We find out later that he had a lot of repressed sadness and anger that he did not show to his mother, right? So let me circle back and also make an observation about America and race in general. I've also connected the dots that in America, when there is a issue that is specifically affecting the white population, it's an our problem. Like, it's America's problem. So suicide in this documentary was really put at the forefront of like saying this is an issue that America has, aka even the title, American Tragedy, and that America and the government needs to solve, right? So we've seen the same thing with the opioid epidemic. It was an American issue that America and the government needs to solve, and society at large needs to focus on and fix. However, what I find when it is a heavily Black issue, and I can only speak to Black issues because I haven't done much or any research related to other not marginalized races in our country, I found that it's a their problem. It's the individuals and their specific community, i.e., crack. It wasn't, we have to be tough on crime. Crack is whack. So it was criminalized, and it was also an individual issue that they had to solve. Say no to dope, right? That was the solution. The individual is in control to fix this problem. Similarly, there has been school violence in the Black community for years. And I've never seen as much attention focused on it as it has been in the way that we focus on school shootings these days that are multiply or are consistently done by white children more and more often. So I just wanted to circle back and mention that's another observation that I had. And I feel some type of way about it, right? Like, the thought that when things that affect us as a Black community are not taken seriously, it eventually trickles to the rest of society. You're only as strong as your weakest link. And if you continually ignore what's going on in your marginalized community, it's going to show up at your doorstep one day, right? Is essentially what I'm trying to say. So it will behoove America, government, our culture at large, to take a look at what's affecting the marginalized community that we do not want to spread to the greater community at large, and work on that ASAP, right? So that's all I'm gonna say about that. But moving on, something else I wrote, which circles back to the things I've been recently pondering, is that I don't like how in this documentary they did not talk as much about what the parent's state was during the time that the child was ramping up to do this school shooting. For instance, they didn't talk much about how stressed the mom was at work, or how the relationship between the mom and the dad was at that time. Were they arguing? I did notice that the dad had nothing to do with the documentary. So first, I assumed that they were split, but I didn't do any research into that. So that could have been a problem. Or even like what was going on during those formative years, even before maybe the child got to high school, because their solution in the documentary was all about giving the children, especially in 7th grade, the keys to mindfulness, right? And, again, circling back to things I've been pondering, I think it's some bullshit to focus your efforts on mindfulness for a child without exploring what the heck the parents had going on. Because here's what I know to be true. A kid can show up as mindful as they can be, and their parents can be narcissistic or mentally checked out and still unable to respond in the way that they need them to, and affect their development, affect the way they see themselves, make them hate themselves. In the uproar of the whole shooting, the parents were getting blamed. Like, the parents were getting a lot of negative media attention, a lot of negativity from society at large. Like, how could you not know what your kids were doing? Getting guns, making bombs. Like, what kind of parent are you, right? And so I felt like the whole premise of the documentary was to say, like, it could happen to anyone, right? And on the surface, most people would probably say, what the fuck ever. You know what I'm saying? Like, no, it could not happen to me. My kids is not going to have no goddamn guns, and I'm not going to know it. But I think they make a good case because, again, from what I know to be sure, is that you can't know everything there is to know about what your kids have going on, especially once they hit middle school age, right? So that's the point they try to make. Plus, they also said, like, there was no outward signs of him, like, being mentally ill or destructive. And then they had, like, the school psychologist back that up. So, and other people who have looked into kids who have been mass shooters, it's like not really common that there are any major issues. But what what I found interesting was she said that there was a period where he was getting in a lot of trouble, just doing some destructive behaviors. And then she kind of had a good talking to with him and he got back in line, right? And for me, and then after that, never a foul word was heard from him, right? And for me, that was really a red flag, right? Like your child is displaying these destructive behaviors and you just like, you better get in line. And then they get in line and nothing happens after that. It's like, again, you didn't lean in to find out what was going on with the child, to see why they were exhibiting these behaviors. What was their level of disappointment, disapproval, rage, that they were experiencing that made them want to do these things? Or was it curiosity? Did they desire more exploration, adventure? You know, what? She had no idea. It was just like, get your shit together or else, right? Another red flag was that she said like he never was a violent child, right? And so because that's what everybody's like, what the fuck is wrong with your child? Of course he had to be violent in order to come shoot up a goddamn school and try to blow up things. And she's like, no, 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 no. My child was never violent. And I believe her. But again, for me, that's a red flag, right? Anger is a natural emotion, right? And if your child is never displaying a natural emotion, there's a problem. I know as parents, we despise our children to be angry, especially at us. But if we don't teach our children how to address anger, it just gets pushed down and suppressed and affects us internally, affects the child internally. And I did a Freudian slip and said us, because there is an instance where I can distinctly remember in my life when I was coming up, I think it was middle school age, where I got into lots of fights. Like, I am a small, little bitty thing. I only stand 4'11". And when I was a kid, I probably was 90 something pounds soaking wet, right? If that. But I would always be getting in fights with boys or big ass girls, right? And, you know, now that I think back, I've realized like why I was doing those things. But what's relevant to this conversation is that my parents or my caretakers never leaned in and was like, Jen, what's going on with you, girl? You've always been this mild-mannered, anti-violent type child. Like, to the point where when I was in elementary school, I would cry when other people would get in fights. And so, like, my parents, the silence was deafening, right? Nobody checked in. Nobody said, what's going on with you? What are you feeling? What's happening? They just, when I stopped doing it, they just went on like nothing ever happened, right? My little mind decided, okay, my behavior is inappropriate, so I'll just never get angry again. That'll fix it. If I never get angry, then I'll never want to fight anyone. And therefore, I will show up with the behaviors that are appropriate to society. Bad idea. Bad idea, right? From my little middle school age on, I proceeded to repress anger for the rest of my life until a few years ago, where I started to realize how important it is to recognize anger and express it in healthy ways, right? And how much damage it does to your self-esteem and your sense of self-worth. So flipping back to this documentary, we have to give our kids the benefit of the doubt. In that same vein, I'm reminded of how, if we don't, nobody else will. Mom was saying that she was waiting to be debriefed by the police. We always want to jump straight to discipline. And discipline basically is very important and has its place in she was waiting of a child. The detectives to tell her without compassion who her son was, and giving our kids the benefit of the doubt, because she had no idea. In those troubled moments, they had gone through his journals, not just when they're showing up in a way that pleases you, but even in those moments where you're embarrassed, other world, or disappointed, this child that she had no idea. When you're able to be consistent, right, and show unwavering compassion and love, use the term that's a game changer. He was a little prick or something like that, which was so sort of like a dog whistle to me, right? I wrote down a few things that made me say there was a level. We focused a lot in the movie about showing how she showed up in his life, Dylan, right? But I was like, what was going on with you, Mom? If there was something did you have repressed anger to her, which is there was an insult displayed by the snapping on the kid instead of them against the refrigerator. Were you overwhelmed with work? Were you overwhelmed with? She specifically your relationship talked about one incident the entire movie where she pinned him up against the refrigerator. I think because he was behaving sticks badly. Out to me the most that I wrote down. She was going through things because she talked so much about how she loved him, and it was just a lot going on in her life to him all the time. And she got pissed at him. And for me, I not said, being the supportive son, we love our kids in that moment that he always had understand them. And again, gave him a stern talk. She did all the things to love him. Never was the wiser. But did she ever do all the things to understand him? Again, it's back to that and sadness. You know what going on the inside, but you have no idea why. And if she had the capacity. Here's another thing, or the bandwidth to slow down. Kids learn and early just on talk what they can and cannot, and say to instead of what's wrong with you or isn't safe to say what's going on. Right? They might not know famous words of Marvin Gaye, but subconsciously they learn, boy, that you are continually or and perpetually always the person I can depend on. So I will hide it. But that's not happening right now. And the thing that keeps coming up for me I want to know somewhere along the line, because this is not what I'm used to. Through no fault of her own. Talk to me. She must have shown him that sadness and anger have no safety with her. If she never seen him show up angry or violent, she must have showed him a long time ago that it was inappropriate. Either by ignoring it or dismissing it, or just having a really inappropriate reaction to it. like responding with discipline rather than compassion. Another thing I wrote down was kind of like, sometimes we see things through a lens of bad behavior when they really could be seen as a really good thing. And maybe she was doing that as well. An example I'll give is like when my son was really young, he was very accurate at throwing. Like if he wanted to hit you in the head, he gonna hit you in the head at like 2 years old, right? And where my husband would be like, good throw, I'd be like, yo badass. You know what I'm saying? Like, why did you hit me in the head? And so like when you show up in that way, you start to formulate the way your kids see themselves in their little minds, right? Again, it's very unintentional, but the way you frame things has a profound effect on how they frame themselves. And then the other thing I wrote down is that finally, circling back to how suicide and murder suicide is a traditionally non-marginalized community theme, I really believe that there is some roots in the pressure to succeed in the white community. When there are not a lot of odds against you, there is a level of expectation of perfection and success that is ingrained in the way you live. And I find that even though they didn't talk about it in this documentary, I'm fairly certain there was a lot of that going on in their lives, in this household. The pressure to succeed, to perform, to do well in life without the recognition of how stressful and overwhelming and hard those trying to do all of those things can be, right? Yeah, so that was pretty much all of my thoughts about this documentary, American Tragedy. It really got my gears grinding, my wheels turning. And for my relaunch of my podcast, I was like, this is something great to talk about, right? Because I feel like this is something that hit close to home as I watch my peers and my siblings raise their children. I feel like this is something we miss, right? And so let me connect the dots for you, for me, right? This is why it impacts me so much, is that Ponder Money is all about like living your life and making and spending money in ways that enrich your life and make you feel free. And when I see my family and my friends working themselves to death to try to provide a life for their children, and they end up missing their children completely because of that effort, it breaks my heart, right? It's the opposite effect of what they actually wanted to happen. And so that's why this cuts me so deep, is that we can't be so overly focused in financially leveling up or being a success that we miss our children completely. It's something that you will always regret. Just ask Dylan's mom. All right, so that's all I wanted to say about that. I think right now that's a good place to stop, and I can move on to my ponderism for today. So today's ponderism is fix yourself before you try to fix anybody else, especially your kids. What do I mean by that? Oftentimes we try to fix other people, especially our kids, not realizing how attached they are to how we're showing up in the world. We spend resources and time trying to help our children when the main way we can help our kids is get our shit together. And so if you focus on self-care, self-avocation, learning how to have boundaries, self-love, self anything with the word self in front of it, you might be able to catch two birds with one stone, right? In helping and fixing yourself, you will end up helping and fixing your children. It cannot help but rub off on them because they're in your face every day, all day. You can't tell your kids not to stress themselves out if you're constantly stressed out, right? You can't tell your kids not to be anxious and worried if you always anxious and worried. So you are teaching them how to cope with life. And if you don't learn healthy ways to cope with life, neither will they. So fix yourself before you try to fix them. And that is all. So that's what I'm going to end with today. I hope you guys enjoy this because I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. It felt great to just really expound on things that are very interesting to me. And I hope that I can continue to find topics that resonate with other people as much as they resonate with me. All right, until next time, take care.